Hi, welcome to another chapter. Now we are diving into a fundamental concept in art values, specifically the interplay of light and shadow. Understanding values is crucial as they create depth, shape, and mood in our artwork. Let's start with the gradient from white to black. This gradient represents the range of values in our work. First of all, we have the white, which represents the brightest light, where all light reflects off a surface. Gray represents the midtones, where light and shadow begin to mix, offering a range of subtlety and detail. Black signifies the absence of light, where all light is absorbed. When we look at this gradient, we see that it is not just about the extremes of light and dark, it's about the transition between them, the nuances in between that bring life to our work. This gradient is what we refer to as the value scale, and artists often use it as a reference to ensure balance and depth in their compositions. Now that we understand the gradient, let's define the contrast that makes an object distinguishable from others. This can be in terms of colors, texture, or most importantly, for our discussion, values. When we talk about value contrast, we're specifically looking at the relationship between light and dark areas in a piece of art. High contrast involves a significant difference between the lightest light and the darkest dark, while low contrast features more subtle shifts between values. So, what does high contrast do in an image? First, we have the dramatic impact. High contrast can create a sense of drama and tension. The stark difference between light and dark can draw attention to specific elements within the composition, making them pop. There's the emphasis. High contrast can guide the viewer's eye to important details. A dark background, it naturally becomes the focal point. This technique is often used in portraiture to highlight facial features, giving the artwork a more engaging quality. Next, we have depth and dimension. Using high contrast effectively can create an illusion of depth by emphasizing light and shadow. Artists can render three-dimensional forms on a two-dimensional plane. This technique is vital in still life and figure drawing, where understanding how light falls can bring objects to life. And finally, there is mood and atmosphere. High contrast can significantly influence the mood of a piece. Dark, shadowy areas combined with bright highlights can evoke feelings of mystery or drama, while a more uniform, lower contrast may create a sense of calm and harmony. Artists often use this contrast to set the emotional tone of their work. In conclusion, values light and shadow are not just about creating a realistic representation, but are essential tools for storytelling in art. Understanding the gradient from white to black, the concept of contrast, and how high contrast impacts interpretation allows to enhance our artistic expression. And how high contrast impacts interpretation allows to enhance our artistic expression. Let's continue with an easy way to visualize and practice using two fundamental schematic shapes. Understanding how to effectively illustrate light and shadow will add depth and realism to your artwork. Before getting into it, let's quickly recall what value is. Value refers to the lightness or darkness of a color. It helps us convey depth and volume in our illustrations. A clear understanding of value allows artists to create realistic representation of objects. Before we start, we have to mention the key components of light and shadow. First, we have highlights. It refers to the area on the object that reflects the most light. Midtone, the transition area between light and shadow, it represents the color of the object in natural light. Core shadow, the darkest part of the object, found opposite the light source. And the cast shadow, the shadow that an object casts onto a surface shaped by the light's direction. Before we, before we start drawing, let's make sure we have a clear understanding of the light source. Identify where the light is coming from. If you have a physical sphere and a light source, place the light source to one side of the sphere. You can observe how the light creates different areas of brightness and darkness on the sphere. If you have a physical sphere, place the light source to one side of the sphere. Observe how the light creates different areas of brightness and darkness on the sphere. And if you don't have one, you can search for references. If you're using a reference image, look for one that clearly shows the light and shadow on the sphere. Notice how the light creates highlights and how shadows fall on the surface. Let's start by sketching the outline of the sphere. And now that we have our basic shape, let's identify where the highlight and shadow will go. Let's identify where the highlights and shadows will go. Look closely at your sphere. Identify where the light hits directly. That's your highlight. The area opposite the highlight will be your core shadow. Where the light is least effective. On your sketch layer, lightly mark where the highlight and core shadow will be. Use a different symbol or note to remember these areas as we move forward. Choose the neutral value that represents the sphere space tone. Using a saffron brush, fill in the entire sphere with this base value. Use a soft brown brush to define the highlight area. Start with a lot of opacity to gradually build the brightness. You can use a blending tool or soft brush to gently blend the highlight into the base value, ensuring a smooth transition. This will enhance the three-dimensional effect. So avoid hard edges. Carefully paint the core shadow on the opposite side of the highlight. This area should be broader as shadow often taper off. Blend the shadow into the mid values using a soft brush or smudge tool. Pay attention to the edges. Shadows are also really hard edge, so ensure a soft transition. As we near the completion of the sphere, let's add some details. Look for areas where the light bounces off surfaces and reflects back onto the sphere. This is typically found near the shadow edge and can add depth to your drawing. On the shadow, you can use an eraser tool of a soft brush to gently lift some of the shading in the areas of reflect light. This can give the sphere a more realistic look as it mimics how light interacts with objects. To finish off the sphere, we need to refine the details. Use a small brush to add subtle details, ensuring the transition between values are ensuring the transitions between values are smooth. If some areas are too stark, adjust their opacity to create a more balanced look. Remember, subtlety is key in achieving realism. Now that we have practiced illustrating the sphere, let's shift our focus to the cube. Let's shift our focus to the cube. The cube is also a fundamental geometric shape that will help us to understand how to represent three-dimensional forms through light and shadow. The flat surfaces of the cube provide a unique opportunity to observe how light interacts with edge and planes. So let's begin by creating a sketch of the cube. Focus on the perspective. You can start with a front face and then at the top and side faces. Take your time to ensure the angles and lines are as accurate as possible. And then it's time to consider how light will affect its surface. Again, whether using a physical setup or a reference image, take note of where the light hits the cube. This will help you determine where the highlights and shadows will fall. Identify which face of the cube will be illuminated and which face will be in shadow. The face facing the light will have the highlight, while the opposite face will show the core shadow. Select a mid value that reflects the cube's base tone. Now we'll bring in the highlight for the illuminated face. Define the highlight area on the face receiving the most light. In this case, the top face. Use a soft round brush with a low opacity to build this highlight readily. Keep it concentrated near the edges and where the light hits the hardest. Gently blend it into the base value to create a seamless transition. This will help emphasize the three-dimensional quality of the cube. Add the core shadow to the face opposite the highlight. This area will be darker and should start from the edge and gradually transition into the base value. Blend the shadow into the mid value using a soft brush. Ensure that the edges are soft, as shadows often have a gradient effect, tapering off rather than being abruptly cut off. We need to consider how the cube will cast a shadow on the surface beneath it. Use a soft brush to create the cast shadow. Start dark at the base of the cube and gradually lighten it as it moves away from the object. Pay attention to the shape of the shadow. It should mimic the form of the cube. So now let's enhance the realism of the cube by incorporating reflect light. Look at the shadowed area. You might notice some light bouncing back onto the side of the cube from the surface below. On the shadow, gently lifts some of the shading to add a subtle area of reflect light. This can this can give the cube a more realistic appearance by showcasing the interaction between light and surface. To complete our cube practice, we'll refine the details. If certain areas appear too stark or too faint, adjust the opacity or apply additional blending as necessary. Strive for a balanced look where light and shadow work harmoniously together.